Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Amma ba'd. Fa'a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Allahumma rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Sadaqallahul azim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today we're looking at, in this session, ayah number 90 of Surah Baqarah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم بئس ما اشتروا به أنفسهم أن يكفروا بما أنزل الله بغيا أن ينزل الله من فضله على من يشاء من عباده فباءوا بغضب على غضب وللكافرين عذاب مهين. Sadaqallahul azim. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in this comprehensive ayah, how wretched is that for which they sold themselves, that they would disbelieve in what Allah has revealed through their outrage, that Allah would send down His favor upon whom He wills from amongst His servants. So they returned having earned wrath upon wrath, and for the disbelievers is a humiliating punishment. So I'm going to sum this ayah up a little bit again, just to get some of the main points out, inshallah, that I want to look at today. Allah Ta'ala first concludes the wretchedness of Bani Israel. Before He goes into the details of what they've done, Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala concludes it. They were wretched, they were wrong in what they did, and Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala points it out straight away. Then He gives a few points. One, they reject the Qur'an when it finally came, because they had been expecting that. They had been expecting not only a Nabi, but a book, a new revelation, a new wahy that would come, which would not only exceed the Torah, but replace the Torah and give them an updated and new Sharia to follow, and new aspects of the deen, and of course about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Himself and the greatness of the people, the believers, in time to come. So all of this they expected was for themselves, and when the Quran does finally appear, though they recognize it, though they are unable to criticize it and condemn it or find fault in it, and they have to accept that this is the book they've been waiting for, they reject it. Why they rejected? Well, we look at number 3. They were envious of Allah's choice. Now, so far what we've spoken about is that the Bani Israel were envious because of Rasoolullaah, sallallaahu, wasallam, the prophet they expected, happens to come from a different qawm, from the Arabs, instead of from themselves. But there was something more that was underlying even that envy, which was a kind of a privilege or a pride type of envy. Now, this was a case where what had happened is, for a long time, Bani Israel is getting prophet after prophet, and in some cases prophets, groups of them. And along with prophets came awliya, the Sahaba of the prophets, and so on. So Bani Israel was having a lot of favoritism, and they knew that, and they indulged in that. But over time, what came to be within them in their behavior is that they came to sort of expect it. They started to take this for granted, that they would have prophet after prophet, and it came to a point where they had so many prophets that they expected this to be the case for themselves. So there was an envy that built up, and I will talk more about that, inshallah, further on. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then also points out in this ayah, wrath repeatedly came upon them. Wrath, the anger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because of this behavior of rejection of both the Quran and Rasoolullaah, sallallaahu wasallam. So they were given the anger of Allah ta'ala. The anger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it manifests in different ways at different times for different people. And it was no different for the Bani Israel. It came in different times and in different ways. But it was the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which usually manifested in their being, finding difficulty in their lives, finding difficulty as a qawm, finding difficulty even as individuals, and within themselves and in their relationship with other qawms around them. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala finishes up by saying that punishment was also humiliation. You see, when punishment comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it can be in different forms. One is your straightforward punishment. You've done something wrong and it comes back on you. And what happens is that this is then the punishment of Allah Ta'ala, that you suffer some harm because of what you have done. However, within that, there is scope that sometimes that punishment is to remind and caution somebody. That somebody may be somebody who's good or on their path to goodness. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is punishing them, but there's also a mercy in that. And that is that the punishment could be worse, and it's not. It's lightened, and it is also a means of alleviation of the sin and expiation of the wrong that they've done. And that is a mercy if we think about in terms of the akhirah, that if a person is going to be punished, always a person would accept and want the punishment on this dunya rather than the punishment of the akhirah, because the punishment of the akhirah is far more severe. So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is angered by something, a sin that a good person does, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will cause some kind of punishment in this life. But what that means is that they will not get the punishment in the next life. So there is a good in that. However, another form of punishment is where the punishment is there because the person, what they have done, they have angered Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to the extent that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is punishing them with an essence of humiliation within that punishment. And that humiliation makes the punishment, in a sense, even worse. And with that humiliation is an indication that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is truly angry with you. And what you have done is most likely not only going to be punished here in this dunya, but it's also going to be something you will face in the akhirah as well. And that's where the humiliation becomes a source of torment in itself, apart from whatever else is actually affecting the person that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's ghadab is upon. So this is something that also came upon the Bani Israeel, a humiliation. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about that in this ayah, about how wherever they go, there was humiliation upon them. And in another part of the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about how they needed the help of other people. They could not work themselves. They could not be independent. Wherever they went, they needed the help of other people in order to establish themselves. They needed to ride on somebody else's back, so to speak. And they could not establish themselves by themselves. They had no, basically, their own dignity, their own way through life. They had to rely on other people, which is a humiliation for anyone to always be dependent on someone else. So this is what this ayah is giving, just some few of the points I'm talking about here in order to summarize it. Okay, so I want to look at a few more details here. The Bani Israel knew that a new prophet and a divine book was soon to come. So many had come to them before of the prophets that it was as if they thought that they were privileged and Allah Ta'ala was duty-bound to consult them in appointing prophets. You see, as I mentioned, so many prophets had come to them, all the way back to Yaqub alayhi salam, that, and I mean in the hundreds, and sometimes it was groups of prophets that came, sometimes it was individuals, and of course, along with those were the awliya, which is the sahaba of the prophets, or awliya of a later generation, based upon the teachings of those prophets. So they were quite blessed, had a lot of barakah in that. But one of the things that happens sometimes is with some people is that when we get too much good, we tend to become proud in that. And the very first being that did that was Iblis himself. Iblis was given prestige, he was given privilege, that he was walking amongst the angels, he was given much knowledge, he was doing a lot of ibadah, and all of this recognition for him kind of got to his head, so to speak, and he felt privileged. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created Adam alayhi salam, he couldn't take it. Not only because there was somebody who was being honored and he was being commanded to bow down before this being, but also because this being, as far as he was concerned, in his logic, was created out of something that was low, mud, earth, soil, and he was created out of smokeless fire. So he felt his pride, and of course, what he forgot, and what the Bani Israeel also forgot in their feeling of self-privilege. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot be questioned. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does what He wills. He does not have to listen to good or bad people. He does not have to do what we want, what we expect, what we wish, what we make dua for. Nothing is binding upon Him. He is completely and ultimately and infinitely independent of His creation. This is something that the Bani Israel seem to have forgotten. In fact, while they were even present in the Arabian Peninsula, at that time, the Bani Israel, they lived in the Middle East, Jerusalem, and so this was their area. This is where the lands that they occupied, the Middle East, even Egypt to some extent. What were they doing in the Arabian Peninsula? Because the Arabian Peninsula was one where it was dry, desert land, nothing really worth anybody's time, because even the great conquerors, Alexander, Genghis Khan, and so on, didn't bother. The Roman civilization, the Roman armies didn't bother with the Arabian Peninsula because it was sand, it was desert, it was dry. There was nothing there for anybody to want. No spoils, no resources, no minerals. So nobody really bothered with the Arabian Peninsula. So why would a people such as the Bani Israel ever actually have tribes who lived in the Arabian Peninsula when Rasoolullaah sallallaahu was then born? Well, because in their book, it was told to them that there would be a prophet and the final revelation, and the final prophet would be born in Makkah, in the Arabian Peninsula. Now, again, because of their pride and their feeling of self-privilege, they thought that this meant that it would come, that prophet would come from them, would be from amongst the Bani Israel. The new book would be from that prophet, which would also be for the Bani Israel. And so they needed to travel to the Arabian Peninsula and be there so that that prophet could be born from amongst them. This is how they understood it. So they migrated there and expected that prophet to be born from amongst themselves, and thought that everything was now in order, in place, because they were there. When Rasoolullaah ﷺ was born, when he declared his prophethood for that matter, and he was from amongst the Quraysh, from the Arabs, it shocked them, but they realized what the truth was. It was as it was, not as they interpreted it, that a new prophet was going to be coming out into the world from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with a new revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Arabian Peninsula, and the people of the Arabian Peninsula would be the ones that would give birth to him, not the Bani Israel. And this to them was a shock and unacceptable, because they had prided themselves upon and felt themselves privileged with that Allah Ta'ala was always sending them prophets. They were the chosen people, so he was going to send the last prophet and the last revelation to them as well to complete that honor. So as a result of this, they felt that they needed to reject the new prophet, and they were shocked that it wasn't from amongst themselves. However, since Allah Ta'ala had not consulted them as they expected, they also felt they had a right to be offended by his choosing without their consultation, and therefore they could reject this prophet. So this is kind of like being almost like a spoiled child. And again, the behavior of Iblis comes to mind. He rejected the bowing down to Adam al-Islam because he felt himself privileged and he felt himself better than Adam alayhi salam. Bani Israel is just repeating that behavior. They felt they were privileged. They have all the prophets. They should, as far as they were concerned, have the last prophet, have the last revelation. So because it hadn't been given to them and they felt they'd been left out, they thought that therefore they could get temperamental with their creator and turn away from this new prophet, turn away from this new revelation, and somehow justify it because of their self-importance. So again, it comes back to the issue of Tawheed. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is independent. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can do what he wants. And a person who believes in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala submits to him. No matter how many times Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does something one particular way, it's his prerogative to change it at any point, even after 100 times of doing it one way. So it is not for us to become used to or taken for granted something from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He can change it, he can stop it, he can withhold it. It's entirely up to him. And a person in their submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has to be aware of this. And it can be a very difficult thing, especially because as human beings, we have a nature of getting used to something becoming habitual, and then we become offended if it changes. But and pride, of course, grows within that. But we need to understand that it is Allah Ta'ala's prerogative. And so this was the fault of Bani Israel in essence. This was the reality, the underlying cause of the rejection of Rasul sallallaahu alayhi wasallam and the Qur'an, because of their feeling that they were the ones, they were the chosen ones, and it should always be from amongst them. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because they'd always done this, He would not change it now. And that was something that they needed to have come to terms with. Okay, so now let's have a look at how this applies to us in the modern times, inshallah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم بئس ما اشتروا به أنفسهم أن يكفروا بما أنزل الله بغيا أن ينزل الله من فضله على من يشاء من عباده فباءوا بغضب على غضب وللكافرين عذاب مهين. How wretched is it that for which they sold themselves, that they would disbelieve in what Allah Ta'ala has revealed through their outrage, that Allah would send down His favors upon whom He wills from amongst His servants. So they returned having earned wrath upon wrath, and for the disbelievers is a humiliating punishment. Okay, one way that we have followed in the footsteps of the Bani Israel, as Rasoolullaah sallallaahu alayhi wasallam warned us about, is that many of the Arabs, especially Saudi Arabia, they often look down upon other Muslim nations and consider them inferior. The ulama of other nations are not given the due respect for their learning, which in many cases is greater than that of the Arab ulama. This is one of the ways you can tell. The Arabs seem to be having pride upon their own shayukh, and the sheikh of another community is not as good as theirs. The people of other communities are not. And this is one of the most common occurrences of this is in the Hajj, where people go and experience Arab hospitality or hostility when they go to Hajj. And you find that people who come from Western countries are given preferential treatment. People who are Arab may get preferential treatment, but people who come from other places, be it India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Malaysia, and so on, are not given the same kind of preferential treatment or respect as is given to those from Europe or America. And the same goes for those from Africa. So this is something that is a similar behavior by Muslims, Arabs in particular, and other nations do it as well, where they feel privileged, where they feel they have something over somebody else. Now, just because Mecca and Medina and Rasoolullaah sallallaahu alayhi wasallam burial place and the Kaaba happen to be in Arabia where the Arabs are, this does not in any way make them superior to other Muslims. All Muslims are alike, and the only superiority, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned, and Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam has taught, is in righteousness, in our piety. So whoever is more righteous or pious than another, he or she is in the sight of Allah Ta'ala the better person. Not because of lineage, not because of race or creed or skin color. So this is something that we need to understand. And as I said, other nations do it as well. It's a tragedy, but it happens. The Pakistani people, for example, often look down on the Bangladeshi people. The Indian people tend to look down on the Pakistani people, each thinking that they are better than the other, more religious, more pious, more deserving, more privileged. So again, it shows the following step by step in the behavior of the Muslim ummah upon the behavior of the Bani Israel. This kind of religious bigotry and self-privilege can also be seen in other nations, one to another, as I've said. with the Indian nation, to the Pakistani nation, which in turn to the Bangladeshi nation, and even amongst the Indonesian, Malaysian, etc. And it's a tragedy. What we have to all remember is Allah Ta'ala can confer piety and righteousness to whomsoever He chooses. It's entirely His prerogative. That is something we need to keep in mind. Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala guides and has open guidance for everybody, but people will respond differently to Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala's guidance. And Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala is not looking upon us as a nation, but as an ummah. And His guidance is open to the entire ummah, and anyone from amongst that ummah, regardless of nation, if we can tear that away and just look upon the whole Muslim ummah as a body of people, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's guidance rains down upon all of us. And whoever of us responds to it will benefit, and whoever doesn't will not. That's the first criteria. Then the second criteria is within those who do respond, there will be categories. Some will respond more than others, right down to the individual level. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in His majesty, in His greatness, in His infinite wisdom and knowledge, is capable of taking each and every one of the millions of Muslims upon individual basis and judging us upon that and giving us our rank, our prestige, our privilege based upon our piety, our righteousness, not upon our nation, not upon our families, not upon our tribes, not upon our skin color, and so on. None of that. No group, no number of people, no such thing can claim that because we are from such and such an origin, we are all saved. No, it is individual. Further to this, we also have, on an individual level, some who are envious of others' piety and practice. There are many people like that. Tragically, it also happens amongst the ulama. Some are envious of others' piety and practice. However, we should think that those people are helping you. They are helping you. Why? How? Because every righteous person or scholar amongst the ulama is trying to give dawah to the people. He is trying to improve the community and the society around him. If he is trying to do that and he's finding it difficult, his ultimate gain, his ultimate goal, his ultimate achievement is to have hundreds, if not thousands of people around him all becoming righteous and pious, which would benefit him, and it would make a better society for his family, his children to grow up in. And he gets the reward for that. However, if somebody else is righteous and pious, rather than to be envious of them, one should think, how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has chosen him as well. He is helping me in my work. He may be miles away. He may be taking a different approach, but he is helping me in my work. My aim being to produce a righteous society. So if there are other people who are doing it, alhamdulillah, my work will be done faster. This community will be better, quicker, and my children will grow up in a better community, one that I may not achieve by myself. So perhaps that would be a helpful way to think of things rather than to be selfish or look down on other people who are doing similar work to you. Other than that, some people who undergo difficulties turn away from Allah Ta'ala as if they are privileged and should be helped out. So this is another example of this privilege, self-privilege and self-righteous behavior of the Bani Israeel amongst the Muslim people. That if something bad happens, difficult happens, they undergo some kind of difficulty, then it's a case of, oh Allah, why are you doing this to me? Why? What have I done wrong? Why me? Why not so-and-so? What did I ever do to deserve this? These are the sorts of thoughts and sayings that come from such people. And as a result of that, they turn away from Deen. They turn away from Deen. And again, such people have to understand Allah is the controller. He is the Malik. We belong to Him. He has the prerogative to treat us any which way He wants. But because He is almighty, all wise, all forgiving, whatever He does, there is some greatness in it. There is some goodness in it. And we just have to take a little time to understand it. And for those who do, alhamdulillah, they benefit from that. Their righteousness, their sabr brings them benefits. many times over in this life and in the next, of course, because their difficulty ends and they realize what was the wisdom behind that. But those who turn away, sometimes even moments before that benefit comes to them, then they have lost. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about such people in other parts of the Quran in detail, that they who are worshipping Allah on an edge, that if something good happens, they're happy for it. If something bad happens, they turn away from Allah ta'ala, or they blame Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's another group of people, of whom there are many in the world, who feel privileged, who feel they are owed something from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just because they're Muslim, just because they've prayed so many times or fasted so many times or done so much goodness, given so much in charity. And as a result of that, they feel privileged that Allah ta'ala will always keep them in that good condition, that they will not have any harm. But when harm comes to them, and it must come to everybody, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put the test of different kinds of things in everybody's life. And it will come to all of us. All of us will experience the different kinds of things that everybody else does. It's there for everybody. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not test one people and not another people. But when that test does come, for these particular people who feel privileged and prejudiced in a sense, then they turn away from deen. Another aspect within this ayah is that often a Muslim may be in a difficulty, but he or she will reject the solution of Islam because it is uncomfortable. So just as Bani Israeel did not accept Rasoolullaah sallallaahu or the Qur'an because it was not from their expectation, so there can be many people in situations where they find the situation, they are given the situation is brought to light in front of them, but they don't take it. And there are many examples. That one particular example I can think of is for in marriage, where a person, a man who wants to get married and he doesn't get married because he couldn't find a good rishta, a good person to marry. But all he can find is perhaps a divorcee or a widow. And as far as he's concerned, his thinking is that I'm a privileged person and I must have somebody who's never been married before, somebody who's young, somebody who's beautiful, etc., etc. And so he doesn't marry the girl that's there who is a widow or a divorcee or perhaps even a little older than him. Whereas in actual fact, there may be such righteousness in that woman that would be of great benefit to that brother. But he decides not to marry such a person because he's looking for the ideal, because he feels he's privileged and he must have that ideal. And he can't have someone who's divorced or someone who's widowed. This is a privileged kind of take, and it's wrong. Same with women. There are many women who, again, cannot find marriage and they're getting older and they live lives of loneliness and depression and anxiety and sadness. And yet there are brothers they can marry, but they do not approach them, perhaps because that brother is already married and they don't want to be a second wife. But this is part of our deen. But because of that, they remain, because they feel privileged that I must have a husband to myself. I don't want to be a second wife. The mothers of the believers were second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, whatever number of wives. They didn't for a moment consider that being a second or third wife means less in status. No, it's just a matter of chronology, that she married him first, she married him second, she married him third. That's all, just a matter of time. In terms of your importance and your value before the husband, in terms of the husband loving you, you are equally loved. In terms of your situation in the marriage according to the Sharia, you are equal. In terms of your piety before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's your own individual piety, and you earn that with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not with your husband. So instead of taking that step, that woman will remain on her own and perhaps live a life of loneliness and depression, and wallahu alam where that may take her. Or in other instances, it may be where a woman is alone and she could marry somebody, but she doesn't want to get married because her previous marriage was such a traumatic affair for her, which she ended up in divorce, that she cannot get into a marriage thinking it's going to happen to me again. I don't want to go through all that again. Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us, and Rasoolullaah has taught us, that a believer is never bitten from the same hole twice. So if you are such a person, you should not think it's going to happen again. That is actually, could be in fact seen to be sinful, because the taqdeer of Allah is up to Allah ta'ala. So who are you to say it's going to happen again? You do not know what is going to happen in the next moment, let alone in your future life with a husband. So it is wrong to consider it like that. And even if it did happen a second time or a third, this is the prerogative of Allah Ta'ala, and there is righteousness in it for you. There is wisdom in it for you. But one should never think, I'm not going to go ahead and marry because it's going to happen again. Do not take taqdeer into your own hands. That is wrong. You had a bad experience, maybe the next one will be a much better experience for you, and you will have learned from the bad experience. You had a bad experience, maybe that was your lesson, maybe that was the ghadab of Allah for some reason, maybe that was a wisdom of Allah for some reason to give you tarbiyah, and the next one you're going to do better because you've learned from the first one. Wallahu alam. But the point is, do not ever have this self-privileged type of attitude, and therefore not to go forward in life. Be we men, be we women when it comes to marriage. And of course, there are many other examples. I'm just using this one because of lack of time. Finally, to reflect upon this spiritually speaking, we should be happy for the piety of other people. Be happy for others' piety. Continue your efforts and remember, it is the prerogative of Allah Ta'ala and the choice of Allah Ta'ala who and what He wants to do. He gives piety and righteousness to those who claim for it because of their sincerity. So you are open to your sincerity, and the next person is open to his or her sincerity. Each one of us, and it's up to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who He confers the righteousness and the piety upon. So when He does, we should consider that to be a bounty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon somebody. When Allah ta'ala gives His bounty to someone, we should be happy for that being on two accounts. One, that a fellow brother or a Muslim brother or sister has now got benefit from Allah ta'ala, because Rasoolullaah sallallaahu wasallam taught us that a Muslim is one who wishes for his brother or his sister what he wishes for himself. This is a sign of Iman. So if somebody gets something good, alhamdulillah, they're pious, righteous, more than you, more practicing, alhamdulillah. We make dua, may Allah give them more, and may Allah give us some of that too, without taking it away from that person. So that's one way of looking at it. Another is that is from the wisdom of Allah Ta'ala. So there must be some greatness in that, beyond our thinking. And if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we were wanting piety, we were wanting righteousness, we want to increase in our ibadah, and we find somebody else is increasing ahead of us, we must know that this is from the wisdom of Allah Ta'ala. And because it's from the wisdom of Allah Ta'ala, it is correct, it is right that that person has what they have above and beyond ourselves. And again, we should celebrate the choice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because as Muslims we submit. We submit, we are humble, we have humility before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We do not feel privileged. It may be that a person has become much better than they ever were, and day by day, week by week, month by month, they're increasing in their righteousness. But at some point, somebody else gets more than you. That's okay. Do not feel privileged. Do not feel that take things for granted that Allah has been given to me, and He will always give to me. He cannot and won't give to somebody else. Or when He does, you realize that, then you become envious. Do not become like this. This is not the way of a righteous person. A righteous person becomes his or her internal pride is destroyed. It's gone. He has no pride. She has no pride. She or he is simply tuned into Allah Ta'ala and are humble before Him and accept whatever Allah gives, whatever He withholds, whatever He gives to someone else and does not give to you, whatever He gives to you so much and so many times and then suddenly gives to somebody else. We accept all of those different situations. We never feel privileged and biased and expectant of Allah Ta'ala continuously giving us. He may test us at any time by withholding, and we submit to that, we accept that, and we continue to love and trust and rely upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala throughout our lives. That's the way to live life and look at the benefits from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His mercy. It can come to you, it may be withheld. You may get it for a while and then suddenly it stops. You may have it for a time and then somebody else gets it. Any of those scenarios, alhamdulillah, it is from the wisdom of Allah. He will not be questioned. We will. He has the prerogative. He has the right. And our belief and submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one which keeps this in mind at all the time whenever we see the benefits of Allah ta'ala coming down through the heavens to wheresoever He wishes. We should celebrate that, and we should submit to that, and we should be joyous and happy for anybody and everybody who becomes blessed with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just as we celebrate somebody who becomes a convert and revert, somebody who takes shahada, everybody's happy. In the same way, we should be happy genuinely when somebody exceeds us in doing righteousness. We should be happy for that person, and we can ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for me too. Alhamdulillah, you have given him. May you increase him in that. May Allah ta'ala bless him further in that. But Ya Allah, may I have some blessing too. We may ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but we should not be envious of the other person. Inshallah, Allah Ta'ala give us tawfiq to understand and benefit from this session, inshallah. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu alayk.